Aloha. Professor Kai Lee and I are together here, and I wanted to get some history to my students. I think it's key. There's a key value to every martial artist to learn their lineage and learn the pioneers in the system and pay them respect. The mixed martial art community today isn't doing that so much as we did it pretty much in the old days, even until recently. Every system you're in, you learn the lineage and you pay respects and homage, and you learn about those persons and the skill sets, and their mastery of lessons will internalize to us through these stories. So if you can share with us a little bit about the AJI, kind of the organization, and Professor Luke, in memory of him, if you can talk more about him to the audience.
Sure. So the AJI stands for the American Jujitsu Institute. Originally it was the American Judo and Jiu-Jitsu Institute, and before that it was actually the American Judo and Jiu-Jitsu Guild. But going way back to the turn of the century, between the 1800s and the 1900s, so the 19th and 20th century, a man named Henry Seishudo Okazaki was doing jiu-jitsu on the Big Island in Hilo, Hawaii. And he did this for health reasons. So similar to the story of Bruce Lee, as a child he had asthma and what may have been tuberculosis, and to combat that he started training in judo and jiu-jitsu. He then also started collecting training from different teachers. So he studied Hawaiian Lua under Lua masters on the Big Island. And then he also went to Japan, studied a number of different styles of jiu-jitsu, as well as judo at the Kodokan, and he got to train and be ranked by the founder of the Kodokan. So Kodokan Judo, if you're familiar with that, in 1882, Professor Jigoro Kano founded that, and that movement had to do with the whole concept of martial arts as being a way of life and character building aspect. That was very important to Professor Okazaki. So the most important thing he felt about the training had to do with your internal and external health. And so internally, the character development, what he called the esoteric principles of judo, of trying to help yourself become your best version of yourself, to become a better person. And also health-wise, because that was a big deal for him. And by occupation, he was a physical therapist, massage therapist, and healer. So this unique combination was also very culturally relevant here in Hawaii, where many of us have relatives from multiple ethnicities and cultures. And as this started, it became the world's first fully integrated multi-ethnic and multicultural mixed martial art. He called it Kodokan Danzanryu Jiu-Jitsu. Kodokan meaning the place where the seniors help the juniors, and Danzanryu meaning the really a Japanese interpretation of the Chinese name for Hawaii. So Danzanryu meant, like, Danzan is like the Sandalwood Islands. So the Chinese that came here before Westerners came here long ago and got involved in the sandalwood trade, they called Hawaii the Sandalwood Islands. And the Chinese characters for that in Japanese translate to Danzan. So Danzanryu, the style of Hawaii, if you will, or Hawaiian style is what my brother and I used to say as kids. Hawaiian style, bro! But he was very innovative in that respect. Also, despite having come up in that old school traditional sense, he was also a pioneer in that he was a no-holds-barred fighter. He fought in tough man contests, in the forerunner of what you would call today MMA, fighting against boxers and catch wrestlers, and incorporating his opponent's techniques into his system to help continually make it better. Also, he taught anyone of any ethnicity, of any ethnic, cultural, or religious background, and he openly taught women alongside men. Now, that was a really big deal back in the 1920s. It was very rare. He also wrote a book on women's self-defense, and he trained the Honolulu police as well as the military here, which was super significant going into World War II, because at that time, hardly anyone in the United States was a genuine brown or black belt in judo or jiu-jitsu. But Professor Okazaki being here in Hawaii, his students included Army, Navy, Marines, all different servicemen, also police officers and first responders, firefighters, and medics. He on purpose showed them how Jujitsu could actually help them solve problems in a less violent way, particularly for police officers, and to help the American servicemen feel less intimidated by propaganda, because at the time, the Nazi propaganda was that every German soldier was a Superman, and the Japanese propaganda had everyone thinking that every Japanese imperial soldier was a black belt in karate or judo. So as the war started, many of Professor Okazaki's students became instructors for military and law enforcement, and because of that, his students went and spoke with the FBI and other officials so that Okazaki didn't have to spend the war in an internment camp. He very much had the spirit of aloha, took on the Hawaiian values in his art. So even though it has a Japanese name, it's very multi-ethnic and multicultural and very much rooted in the cultural environment of Hawaii. Now, since you asked about Professor Luke, this is a picture of him here. He's very significant to my personal story, but Professor Luke's father was the president of the AJI going into the 1960s, and his father's teacher was Bing Fai Lao, who was one of Professor Okazaki's first students. Bing Fai Lao was also a master of Tai Chi and taught me Tai Chi, and was really quite remarkable because, like Professor Okazaki, Bing Fai Lao took on that internal character development aspect, where there really was a trinity in the teaching between the esoteric principles or character development, the healing arts and physical fitness aspects, as well as the self-defense. So those three things are actually like a trinity, if you will.
And that's the Trinity scroll.
Yes, you can see that resembled in the logo. And also on the logo, the outline is the Hawaiian coat of arms for the Kingdom of Hawaii, which is where the system was born. You also have a kuro obi, or black belt, where you can see the white at the edges, because the idea is no matter how advanced you are, you're always a white belt on the inside, and you're really always a beginner. You're really always starting over again and learning over again. And in what you referred to, Snake, that's very true. In Hawaiian culture, we're nothing without our kupuna, without our senior citizens and our ancestors. There's a saying in Hawaiian Lua that my teacher, Aloha Dennis Eli, likes to say that if we don't know our roots, we can't know where we are, much less where we're going. So it's very important to do as Sifu Snake does if you're a martial arts instructor, and always give credit where credit is due to where you learn different things, especially if, like yourself, if you train in a multitude of different arts, that becomes important. And Professor Okazaki, the founder of the AJI, he did that, or we wouldn't know this. We wouldn't know that he studied some catch wrestling, he studied some sabat, boxe française. He did. He incorporated even eskrima and kung fu and Okinawan karate into his Kodokan Danzan. So Bing Fai Lao took a particular interest in the Chinese element because he was Chinese, and also went into Tai Chi. His student was Professor Luke's father, who also was named Sam Luke, and they were also mixed. They were Hawaiian and Chinese. And Professor Luke told a really cool story one day in class because he remembered the attack on Pearl Harbor, because he was born in 1935, so he was 6 years old, when the attack came. And when he was in high school, his father asked him to start helping to teach. And they started club classes at Punaho School, which is where President Barack Obama went to high school, and at Kamehameha schools. So those were the first two clubs, and this was in the 1950s. And my father was one of the kids in that class. So Professor Luke helped teach my dad, and also helping with that class was his father, Professor Sam Luke Sr., and Bing Fai Lao and Richard Takamoto also helped with that class. And then they were invited to go to Kaheka Lane, to Okazaki's Ombu, to his main dojo as well. And so, long before I even existed, Professor Luke was part of my life by having helped my father. And in time, he ended up becoming the longtime president of the AJI. So when I came into maturity and was ready to start my class, he invited me to become an active member. And even though I'm in so many different martial traditions, I was deeply honored because of that connection to my father. and also because of how he was. And he had this way about him, which I have a term for it when I was a kid. I'd say men of respect, where you just feel like being around that kind of person is going to help guide you to become a better person. When you're around someone with that level of character and integrity, it makes you want to be a better version of you. Like, in many ways, he wasn't a very large man, but he had that feeling of like Yoda from Star Wars or Master Oogway from Kung Fu Panda, if you want an analogy. He famously was in 2 street fights where he didn't have to fight. His father got him to start taking martial arts, in part because at that time, because he was part Hawaiian, he wasn't readily invited at that time, like you had to be pure Chinese to take this class, or pure Japanese to take that class, or pure Filipino to take this other class. But Professor Okazaki, because his system was mixed and he had a very open policy, it didn't matter what ethnicity you came from, you were welcome in his dojo, as long as you were willing to try to do those 3 things, especially the first one, in following the esoteric principles to be a better person. So he epitomized that in many ways. So he had a situation where he used to go to the movies and people would take his nickel. Back in the day, it wasn't very much, but they didn't have TV, so it was a big deal to go to the double features and be able to bring your nickel and go. But there was a bully that would always intercept him on the way to the movie theaters and take his money. So then his father said, "Hey, I want you to start taking the class." And after he'd been training a while, he felt ready. And when the bully went to confront him, he took up his fighting stance and, said, "Well, you can try to take it." And the bully's like, "Oh, you know how to fight now?" And he's like, "Well, you can find out." And the bully was like, "Never mind," because he didn't want a tough situation. He's going to go pick on somebody else. So he found out that just the confidence and the bearing was enough to solve the problem without actually having to hurt someone. Another story he revealed to me was later on, he was in the army and he was in a bar, and somebody wanted to start a fight with him because they thought he bumped into him or something. And the other person took a stance where Sam Luke knew that he must train martial arts. So he said to him, "Would your instructor approve of you wanting to fight me here and now? Would your instructor approve of that?" And the other man said, "Oh, you train martial arts?" And he said, "Yes, da da da." And then the other man said, "No, my instructor would not approve. Let me buy you a beer." And then they became friends. And one day after church, he introduced me to this person. So they were lifelong friends. It was amazing that he was able to do that. He was able to turn lemons to lemonade, to turn adversity into good fortune like this. He had a way of making everyone who met him feel better for having done so. He was an extremely special inspiration to me, and he radically changed how I taught. At the time when I came back to Hawaii after being gone for a long time, he asked me to teach his grandson and the kids from his church. Now at that time, I hadn't taught any children since I was a child myself. So it was difficult because I'd been working with some of the same kind of people that you've worked with on really more of a life and death kind of a level. And so to now deal with 5 and 6 year olds is a completely different mindset and different approach. And then you have to take the responsibility, or in Hawaiian we would call it the puliana, to malama, to care for them in such a way that what you give, what you kokua of your mana'o, of your knowledge, is going to be truly beneficial to them and about what's best for them, having nothing to do with you or what you used to do. So I had to restructure everything built around this man's guidance of keeping that character development to be the primary mission. That the primary mission was to help people become better tomorrow than they were yesterday, from the ground up. And I would not be doing what I'm doing now. We would not be here in my school if it wasn't for this man. And I really wish all of you could have met him. And he is still here with us in spirit to this day, which is why we have his portrait here in our school. And I know that in a spiritual way, he knows you because I've known you for so long. So I knew both of you at the same time. So in a way, I feel like he's here blessing your presence in our school.
Thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it. Awesome.